Lynn writes, I got to stay at home. I got to watch TV. I got to play the Switch. I got to play on my mommy's iPad. I got to go to bed at 10:30 and 11:30. I got to play with my favorite toys. I got to Dave and Buster's. So here we'll invite all of you in the chat into this conversation. So we ask in the chat to please write, what does Leah Lynn still need to work on in terms of her writing? Many of you are mentioning transitioning from one idea to the next. Varying sentence starters or sentence structures, absolutely, right? Leah Lynn starts almost every sentence, if not every sentence, with that phrase, I got to do this, I got to do that, right? So as Shanna says, it is very repetitive. So a lack of sentence variety. Yep, very similarly structured sentences. And when put together in this, attempt at a paragraph, it really reads, these sentences really read more like a bulleted list of items than an actual paragraph. Yep, conjunctions, adding conjunctions to her writing as a way to expand on ideas. Again, little elaboration. Yeah, Mary James topic sentence, question mark. There really is no topic sentence, is it? Right. So not only does Leah Lynn need to really practice varying her sentence structure, she still needs to be explicitly taught what a paragraph is. There's no topic sentence, there's no concluding sentence. So as a paragraph, it lacks coherence. It lacks a sense of unity around a main or central idea. Yes, very good, and a lot of similar responses. And I do apologize with a course this size, it's just going to be impossible to get to everyone's comments. And as I'm looking, I still have 72 messages to read. So we'll do our best to try to pick from a wide range of responses with each interactive piece. So thank you, everyone. And yes, we absolutely agree. Now, I mean, keeping in mind too, as a second grader, there's definitely some things to celebrate about Leah Lynn's writing. She certainly has the concept of a sentence down. Right? She's not writing in fragments. And although there are some misspelled words, there are other words that are spelled correctly. However, many of the things that you mentioned in the chat, Leah Lynn really needs explicit instruction in. And these types of issues are not just seen at the elementary levels. So now we're going to jump ahead to Danny. Now, Danny was a 9th grader at the time that this pre-assessment was administered, and he was given the prompt to explain why we study the past. So similar to Leah Lynn, we'll read through this paragraph, and then I'll ask you in the chat to point out what you notice about Danny's work. So Danny writes, we study the past because it's good to learn about things that happened years ago. In history, we learn all about the past. We learn about what was that happened years ago, how many people died, generals, what countries were in them. So again, in the chat, if you were the teacher administering this to your student in the fall, what do you notice about Danny's work? What are some areas where he needs to improve? Against pedophilia, they fight it very. Yeah, and I love the variety of responses that are coming in on a more mechanical level, right? We have some verb tense agreement issues, certainly, but also a lot of responses in terms of not being very specific. And this is true. He really doesn't successfully address the prompt. This writing really lacks coherence. Needs more explicit supporting details. Yep, a lot of very vague language without any follow through, no specific examples. Although here there is maybe arguably a topic sentence, it's certainly not the type of topic sentence we would strive for. So he could use some explicit instruction in how to write a topic sentence. If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours. More comments about adding more detail, expanding the sentence. More of you are pointing out that vague terminology, words like things. Yes, excellent. And so some issues similar to Leah Lynn's, others that were more unique to this particular prompt that Danny really had a difficult time addressing. But again, like Leah Lynn, even though Danny is in high school, there's still a lot of room for improvement and a lot of areas where Danny needed support. And now for our final sample, we have Karina. Karina was in 7th grade at the time that she wrote about a challenging weekend with her mother. For this sample, we're not going to comment together on the work, but I would like to read it to you because it is an example of one of the most common things we see in student writing. And so Karina writes, a few weeks ago, it was Saturday, and I asked my mom if I could go with my friend to go shopping. And of course, she said no. So I asked her if I could just stay at her house. She gave me permission. So as I read it, as you read it to yourself, hopefully you heard this common issue with students writing. Karina's writing the way that she speaks. She's writing in a very conversational, informal tone. And this is a common fallback for students who have not been explicitly taught how to write. So one of the primary goals of the writing revolution is to move students away from writing the way they speak and move them towards writing more like writers, using uniquely written language structures. But as we saw with the statistics in the earlier slide, students aren't well equipped to do this because writing is one of the hardest things that we ask them to do. And there's several reasons for this. So why is writing so challenging for students? Well, for one, there's a big difference between spoken and written language. And in many respects, spoken language is much easier. It's much easier to convey our meaning when we speak versus when we write. Right? For example, when we speak, we can rely on hand gestures, we can modulate our tone of voice to convey our message, and we don't have to be as precise. So it's common and acceptable even when we speak to speak in run-ons. We can speak in fragments and still convey meaning. We can use filler words or utterances like or so and still make sense and convey our message. And certainly I may be guilty of some of those utterances myself during this very presentation, but we can get away with these kinds of habits in spoken language. But these same habits are not okay when it comes to writing. In writing, we do need to be far more precise with our language. And there are certain written language structures that we don't use when we speak. And since young kids first learn how to communicate through spoken language, if they aren't explicitly taught these written language structures, then when they are asked to write, they're just going to fall back on what they know, and that is to write conversationally the way that they speak. And so we have a few two contrasting examples to make this case. So here we have a student whose topic sentence reads, "So I once read a book called Diary of a Wimpy Kid. There was a character named Gregory." Now, this is a student that has not been explicitly taught written language structures, and so they are falling back on writing the way they speak. It's a very conversational sentence. They're beginning with "so," the sentence becomes a run-on, as opposed to this student who writes for their topic sentence, "Ricky, a character in the Banana Leaf Ball, changes throughout the story." So this is a student who was explicitly taught the Hockman method and is using an appositive phrase in their topic sentence, which is a written language structure. But appositive phrases is not a way that we commonly speak to each other. It would actually sound pretty awkward to speak using appositive phrases. So if students don't hear appositive phrases in spoken language very often, if ever, and they're not explicitly taught this written language structure,
what is this, Neil?
then how can we expect them to use this structure in their writing? They're not going to intuitively pick up on it. Now, another reason that writing is challenging for students is having a sense of audience. The best writers have a sense of audience.
Okay.
And to illustrate this, I'm going to walk us through a somewhat silly example. So let's say that I have my grandmother staying with me as a house guest,
the old habits.
and
What was the date
I have to leave early the next morning for work. And as I'm leaving, I realize that we're out of milk. And now, as mortified as I am, I have to leave a note from my grandmother, who's still sleeping,
and when are you looking to actually
asking
pull the trigger
her
on it?
to pick up milk from the grocery store. And so if I'm to write a note like this to my grandmother, it may look like this. Dear Grandma, I had to run to a meeting. If you don't mind, would you please stop by the store and pick up some milk for us? Thank you so much. We'll be back soon. Hugs and kisses, hugs and kisses. So of course, knowing my audience is my grandmother. Right?
Well, if we want to send out a message, we got to send out the message before we pull the trigger.
I'm going to write that
sense,
note
right?
with all of the formality and politeness that I can muster up. Now, if my note was going to be sent, say, to someone else, like a friend who's staying over, an old, high school or college buddy who I'm comfortable with and have a less formal relationship.
So the message I'm saying is
my note to them may read
that we are conducting
no need for
an update, and it is recommended that they restart their computers multiple times between now and Friday.
This isn't the kind of note that's going to offend them. So both notes are asking the same thing. However, the difference is having a sense of audience and knowing who I'm writing to. So that's something that is really missing in student writing. They're unable to modify what they say based on their audience.
Do they need to turn them on or restart
as
them?
Adults, we have a sense of audience. I have a sense of audience.
That's what I was thinking. I would like to ask them to restart, because if they just have it sleeping and they just open up the lids, will they really get the package that you're delivering and have it being properly installed?
So another reason writing is so challenging is because of a lack of background knowledge in our students.
Okay.
Background knowledge is crucial when it comes to writing,
okay, I'll put that
especially
together.
when students are asked to write at length about a topic in a paragraph or a longer composition or essay. And it's virtually impossible.
Then do it today.
Well or coherently about if you don't know a lot about.
Yeah, we're just asking them to turn on their computers and do a restarting of them in order for the package to be properly installed. I'll do that after the package is already in the air.
On one of my favorite novels. But if I'm asked to write an essay on a topic I know little about, such as a scientific topic like on subatomic particles, I would struggle mightily to even come up with enough words to fill the required number of pages. So background knowledge makes writing very challenging for students when they lack that background knowledge going into the assignment. And finally, few activities are as cognitively challenging as writing, because writing places huge cognitive demands on our brains, in particular our working memory, which is finite in capacity. And we're going to speak a little more about memory now on this next slide. So as educators, one of the things that we hope to impress upon everyone over the course of these sessions is thinking about how much cognitively we're loading our students' brains with when we assign a given writing task. And so part of helping with that understanding is knowing a little bit about how memory works. So on the one hand, we have our long-term memory, right? And this is where we store and organize a seemingly infinite amount of information. It's where information is just comfortably nestled into our mind and is able to be easily recalled or retrieved. So think about being asked to recite the alphabet, or a childhood phone number, or perhaps that one password that we have for all of our accounts, even though we know it's not a good idea, right? This is information that we can recall with relative ease, really effectively, and we don't have to think a lot about the information to come up with it. Now, this is as opposed with short-term memory, which is where we only store information for a brief amount of time. Think about memorizing the telephone number of a restaurant to place a food order. Well, it's very likely that during that conversation to order the food, that phone number that you remembered and dialed in has already kind of slipped out of mind. So short-term memory is where we just hold information that we need for day-to-day things, but as soon as we've used the information, it leaves our memory. And now I'd like to go through an example with all of you showing the difference here between long and short-term memory. So I'm going to give you a phone number, my childhood phone number, and I want you to kind of recite it to yourselves, either in your head, or if you want to just kind of quietly whisper it to yourself, just kind of mouth it out loud. So the number is 845-223-5607. So again, that's 845-223-5607. So this is a number that is now entering your short-term memory, and hopefully it's a number that you will forget very quickly. Otherwise, I'll have to explain to my parents why they're getting all these prank phone calls. But now what I would like you to do is write that number in the chat, but I want you to write it backwards. And I'll give everyone a moment to do so. So remember, we're writing it in the chat backwards. Some of you are very close. Some of you not as close. Some of you are, looks like not even going to attempt it. Yep, it's gone, Lynette says. Not able to do it. Summer mode, yep. We are on summer mode. I know for our Texas cohort, it's maybe too early in the morning for this kind of exercise. And I think a few of you did get it. Ooh, which is very impressive.
That's a first, Sean.
Well, in any case, the oh goodness. The purpose for this is to give an example of working memory. And so when I asked you to write this number backwards in the chat, all of your brains entered working memory. And this is where we take information that has been stored either in long or short-term memory, and we need to manipulate that information in some way to facilitate the management of multiple features or details. And working memory is very limited in capacity. Unlike long-term memory, in working memory, our brains can get very easily overwhelmed. And we really, even the best multitaskers can only hold on to a few pieces of information at one time. And when we ask students to write, really, no other academic skill puts such a heavy demand on students' working memory as writing, with all of the rules and conventions and background knowledge and audience that students have to consider when they write. And anything that's taking up capacity, taking up real estate in our working memory is cognitive load. And so since students typically can only manipulate 3 to 4 pieces of information at one time in their working memory, it's important as educators that we really consider how much we're tasking students' working memory, how much cognitive load we're placing on them anytime we give them a particular assignment. Writing, just simply put, imposes a heavy cognitive load for students. And again, that is because of the vast amount of skills associated with the writing process. Now, the skills on the left, these are skills like handwriting, capitalization, spelling, punctuation. These are considered lower level skills, but they're still important skills. And our goal, especially in the earliest grades, is to get students to acquire these skills on the left with a certain level of automaticity, to help them to store these skills in their long-term memory, to free up that valuable cognitive real estate to think about higher level skills, such as meaning in their writing, purpose, audience, considering syntax and varying syntax, as well as semantics. This is the goal. So when we teach, we have to ask ourselves, what are we loading up our students' brains with? What do they already know? What do they have to know? And am I overloading their circuit? So if we give our students a multiple paragraph essay to write, and most of their cognitive load is going to be going towards correct punctuation and spelling, then with a certain degree of predictability, we can tell that the students are going to struggle with that assignment. Now, not only is writing challenging for students, but as teachers, there's a lot of challenges associated with teaching students how to write. So we will occasionally launch some polls during the course, and this is going to be our first poll. And we're going to ask, to what extent do you believe your college teacher preparation program prepared you to teach students how to write? And your responses will be, it did not prepare me, it somewhat prepared me, or it prepared me. And I will launch that right now. So we'll give everyone a moment to go ahead and respond. And some of you are very adamant about your responses in the chat as well. You are not alone in that response. How much cognitive load is their cell phone taking up? Right, so that's not even to consider the amount of distractions in students' minds when they go to write. Yet another challenge. We'll give another 30 seconds or so. We're at 88% participation, which is really great given we have 200 participants. So thank you everyone for your engagement thus far. And I think the results are going to be unsurprising. Okay, I'll end the poll here and share the results with you. So this is what we commonly see when we launch this poll. Typically, the majority of participants will say they did not feel prepared to teach students how to write after they left their teacher preparation program. Some will say somewhat prepared them, and usually only a very few will select that they did feel adequately prepared to teach students how to write. So for those of us that felt we were not prepared, well, we're in good company. Okay. And a lot of teachers, not just in this course, in this chat, feel the same way. They did not feel equipped to teach writing. And we have some statistics just to highlight that. So for example, teachers across content areas and grade levels in the US, in a majority report a lack of preparation to teach writing. 3 out of 4 elementary level 3rd and 4th grade teachers reported that their college teacher preparation program provided no or minimal instruction to teach writing. And the same can be said about secondary grades, where 71% of high school teachers surveyed indicated that they received no or minimal formal preparation to teach writing. Now, as teachers, we realize how important it is to teach writing. We're certainly well aware of different benchmarks and standards, whether that's building expectations for where students should be with their writing, state or national expectations. So we know the cumulative goal. We know what the students are going to be asked to produce by the end of, say, a given school year. But likely many of you are here because you don't know or haven't been told the roadmap to get from the students that are exhibiting writing skills like we saw in those pre-assessment samples like Danny, and how to get Danny from writing that paragraph about how he studies the past to meeting a national benchmark standard in June. And that's where the writing revolution comes in. This method really is going to serve as that roadmap, as that guide for how to build students' skills methodically, first at the sentence level, eventually up to those benchmarks. And I'll turn it over to Sophia now to introduce the method.
Thank you so much, Sean. All right, so in this method, the sentences, right, this is a bedrock of the method, and it is seen as the building blocks of all writing. So if our students cannot write a decent sentence, then try to imagine what their paragraphs and their essays will look like. So this is where you're going to spend majority of the time at the sentence level strategies, not only to improve their writing, but this is also going to enhance reading comprehension, and it's also going to build content knowledge. And when students, they're ready for paragraphs, you are now going to introduce them to the single paragraph outline, or what we call the SPO. And this is going to be an important planning tool to help students alleviate that cognitive burden associated with writing those paragraphs. And just like the paragraph, when students are ready to move into longer compositions, we are going to teach them how to use that multiple paragraph outline, or the MPO, to do this. And then once they have mastered, once they have these foundational skills, then when they transition to more sophisticated writing, like argumentative essays and research, this will be definitely a lighter lift for them. Now, on the periphery of the light bulb, you are going to see some very, very important skills that are embedded in the method. So we are going to explicitly teach students how to revise, not just edit their writing. We're also going to teach them how to take notes, as well as how to summarize. So it is very, very important here to note that all of these skills in the light bulb must be explicitly taught. We are not going to make any assumptions, and we're not going to leave anything to chance, right? It's a very scaffolded approach. We're going to go slow so that we can go fast. So we're meeting our students where they are. We're creating that foundation for them. And then we build on that foundation one layer at a time. Now, if you think of our name, the Writing Revolution, it's really a misnomer, because what happens is so much more than writing. So we see writing, reading, and thinking as inextricably linked. And in many ways, writing is going to boost those other two areas. So for example, when you teach your students how to write complex sentences, the chances are when they encounter those sentences in a text, processing will be so much easier for them. And when you write, you have to think. So the strategies in the method, it's going to prod that critical thinking skills. And when we teach students how to plan before they write, this is where we're elevating their analytical thinking. So the strategies in this method, they're all in service of the three here: writing, reading, as well as thinking. Now, this is an evidence-based methodology, and what you see here are the 4 meta-analyses in which there are combined findings of hundreds of studies. And TWR homes in on the strategies that have shown to be most effective. So if you would like to do a deeper dive in this, you can screenshot and they're publicly available for you. Now, based on research, the method rests on these 6 principles. So I'm going to walk you through each of these, just to discuss each briefly. Now, first principle: students need explicit instruction in writing starting at an early age. Now, very few students will become good writers on their own. They won't just pick up writing through reading. A student can be an avid reader, but still struggle with writing. And the idea that explicit practice leads to proficiency, it's widely accepted. If you think about athletes and musicians, right? But it's not understood when it comes to writing. What research supports that novice writers, this is how they're going to learn. They are going to learn best through observing as well as doing, much like musicians and much like athletes. Therefore, students, they need to see you in charge. They need to see the teacher explicitly modeling writing strategies, and they are also going to need that consistent practice. And in this course, we are going to share with you the best practices for delivering the TWR in your classroom. So for example, we're going to explain to you that hear, see, say, as well as that I do, we do, you do. Both have proven to be very beneficial when explicitly teaching these strategies to students, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Now, the second principle in the method is the sentences are the building blocks of all good writing, and they are in service for when students do extended writing independently. So there are a variety of sentence level strategies that we're going to teach students to guide them to use those complete sentences, to extend their responses, and to demonstrate mastery of the content. So for example, as you see here, we're going to teach students how to do sentence expansion. So they're going to give them the simple kernel sentences, and they have to use those question words to give more information to the reader. And they're also going to taught that formal written language structures, such as the appositive Sean mentioned earlier, to enhance their writing. Now, for decades, and maybe even currently, writing, we know that it's been taught in isolation. So there is a writing center or a writing lab down the hall. And when writing instruction is divorced from content, and you have students, they write about unrelated topic to the content they're learning, it's a wasted opportunity to boost content knowledge or to boost their learning. So this is going to take us to our next principle, or third principle, which is when embedded in the content of the curriculum, writing instruction is a powerful teaching tools. So all the strategies that we'll cover in all three parts of the course, they are in service of your content, and they are intended to help boost learning, right? To help students build that knowledge. And in my work, in our partnership schools and in the districts that we've seen the method be a game changer when it is practiced. Students are practicing those same strategies from one class to the next. So when students are practicing, for me in English, right, in social studies, to science, to math and beyond, this is going to create that coherent common language around writing instruction in the school. So this is where you're definitely going to see students, the face of their writing change, especially when embedded right across the curriculum they're studying. Now, the fourth principle is the content of the curriculum drives the rigor of the writing activities. So the method spirals throughout grades, right? The principles will remain the same. It is the content that's going to drive the rigor. So let us say, for example, a third grade student may practice completing sentences with subordinating conjunctions around the text chicks and salsa. While if you go into 10th grade, you'll find students, they're practicing the same activity, but it's around Napoleon. So if you look at this example, you will see sophisticated vocabulary here, like the word abdicated is embedded in the stem. So the grammar and the usage rules, they don't change as students get older or move on to different grades. So the activities is consistent throughout the grades. It's a content, the vocabulary that you will use to drive that rigor. Now, again, over several decades and maybe even now, we know that grammar is taught in isolation. And research shows that when you teach grammar rules in isolation, it does not help students to transfer those skills to their independent writing. And studies also show that when they examine the impact of explicit grammar instruction, it have yielded negative results, and it has shown zero impact and no impact on helping to improve students' writing. And for many of our students, think of your novice struggling writers. If you ask them to break down sentences into components, parts, right? Label the part of speech, diagram in sentences, all of this is just going to add to the confusion, and it's going to take up valuable cognitive real estate, and it still will not carry over into their independent writing. So what does work? This is going to bring us to our fifth principle, is that grammar is best taught in the context of students' writing. So what you see here is one of our strategies in action, sentence combining. So when you do use an activity like this with your students, when you do it with them, this is how you can guide students through the correct usage. You can model how to use how to combine using the different ways that you will teach them. And you would do this with explicit modeling. Now, the sixth and final principle states that the most important phases of the writing process are planning and revising. And we know that writing, as Sean just walked you through, can be cognitively challenging and overwhelming for students. So we have to teach them how to plan. And we're going to do this using that single paragraph outline or that multiple paragraph outline. And these will help to alleviate this burden by now enabling students to organize their thoughts before they get to writing them. And in the method, students will also learn how to revise their work, not just edit by fixing mechanics such as spelling and punctuation. They are going to revise their work by applying all that sentence level strategies in the method that you've walked them through. It's going to create that common language, and then you'll use this to give students those specific, targeted, actionable feedback. And you'll see all of this as we progress through the sessions. So once more, here are the 6 principles the method is grounded in, which will represent the recurring themes of our talking points throughout the course. If you have the guidebook, Dr. Hockman discusses these principles more in depth on page 8 in that book. So you can take a look at this when at your convenience. Now, we want to hear from you. So what is one prevalent issue in your students' writing that you hope will be addressed in this course? So go ahead and share in the chat. What is one issue very prevalent that you hope will be addressed as we go through the sessions in this course? Motivation, how to revise, how to elaborate, writer's block, organization. Oh, Sean, I see what you're saying here. These are popping up so fast. So planning, we see that structure, sentence diversity, elaboration, revision, patience. Writing takes time and effort. Yes, you have to teach them. That's how they will build stamina too, which they need when they're writing. So writing in details. Oh, being able to summarize what they read and promote comprehension. Very good. Structure and word choice. We see organization and planning. Adding details, that confidence, yes. Writer's block, comma splices. So all of what I'm looking through here, I can think of strategies in the method that will definitely you can use to address these with your students. So again, you're in the right place. Now, before Sean walk you through the very first sentence level strategy, just a few things to cover. Now, the sentence level activities, they are pivotal to the success of the method, and we're going to review the whys for this. Now, as I just mentioned, right, the sentences, they are the building blocks of all good writing. So if we're going to build a house, think of that. If you're building a house, you would not start at the roof, right? You would definitely make sure that you start at the foundation. So if we want our students to produce that solid paragraphs and solid compositions, then we need to build a solid foundation at the sentence level. So we're going to, when we teach the sentence level strategies, we're going to help students. This is where we're going to move them from writing the way they speak to now using those formal structures of written language. And as mentioned before, when students write, especially at length, it imposes this huge cognitive demand. And if we're novice or struggling writers, they're asked to write at length, their working memory may be so overwhelmed that they're going to struggle with retaining what it is that they're trying to write about. So one of the best ways we can alleviate this cognitive load is to begin writing instruction at the sentence level. And the activities in the sentence level will be a powerful way. This is how you're going to build that content knowledge and vocabulary and really cement the information that they are learning. And then the sentence level work, it's going to help to enhance students' reading comprehension. It's going to help students to become familiar with the syntax, familiar with the written language structures when they see them in a text. And finally, instead of now doing separate or isolated grammar lessons, you can use the sentence level activities to teach, and you'll see this as we walk through each of them, to teach that grammar and conventions. And these will lay the groundwork for now revising and editing those longer pieces of writing. Since this is where it's at the sentence level, this will create that language that you will use with your students for revision as well as editing. And you will see throughout all of part one at the sentence level strategies, these are going to serve as a fantastic way to check for comprehension or understanding in your room. Now, on that note, in the chat, tell us, where in your lessons do you check for understanding? So at what points in your lesson do you check for understanding? So I see middle and end right throughout as often as possible. Beginning, middle, end again. Throughout, during. See some more specific responses here. We do an end of lesson. Okay, before moving into you do. Exit tickets, so if they're specific. Throughout, start at the middle and end. So yes, we have different ways we could check for comprehension in our classrooms. Now, the do nows. So yes, all of these strategies that we're going to walk you through, all of these activities, similarly to what is placed in the chat here, you can do these as do nows. You can use these for warm-ups, stop and jots, exit tickets for homework, even for weekly assessments if you do them. So you can use them to check for understanding. You're using to check for understanding as well as you're providing that explicit instruction. So at any points in your lesson, any of these strategies can be used at these points. And what can the TWR product look like? So it can be more than just a worksheet, right? You can complete the activity in front of the classroom. You can make it be an oral practice where you do it as whole class. An oral instruction, we do encourage you to, it's very important despite the grade that you teach. You can also do these strategies on sentence strips. So if you're making the experience for the students a bit more kinesthetic and fun for learners, the sentence strips, we know these are teachers' best friend from kindergarten through high schools. And of course, the strategies can also be completed on worksheets, and you can do these manually or you can do it digitally. I've even seen it done on a Jamboard where students share responses on a Jamboard or Padlets where they could all see responses. So you can get creative with how you do it in the classroom. Just make sure that you're purposeful and you're explicit with them. The point is, at any point, the point is the strategy is meant to fit the needs of your students. So just you know them best, meet them where they are, and make sure that once you're maintaining the integrity of this strategy. Now, here are the sentence strategies and the method. So it's 10 of them, or 10 children, and we're going to discuss each in more details. But before we do that, we need to clarify what we mean when we talk about level 1 and level 2. So level 1 examples, right? These are designed for students with basic writing skills, your novice writers, your English new learners, your students with diagnosed and undiagnosed language-based learning disabilities, etc. So it's not just focusing on elementary level, it's also considering the abilities of your students. And then for level 2 examples, these are designed for your more advanced students with more advanced writing skills. Again, to be clear, level 1 does not necessarily mean elementary. We know, especially if you're working in an ICT setting, you can have secondary students who lack basic writing skills. So we wanted to adapt the TWR activities to meet the students' needs and abilities. And you'll see we're going to show some ideas as to how you can modify or differentiate these to meet your students' needs. And if you're following in the book, you can find the distinction between levels 1 and 2 on pages 17 through 19. And with that said, Sean, are you ready for sentences and fragments?
I'm ready, Sophia.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, so as Sophia mentioned, this is the suite of strategies, and we are going to present these strategies in the intended sequence that you would introduce these strategies to your students. Just keep in mind, we don't wait for mastery of a given strategy before we move on to the next strategy. So the goal with all of these strategies is introduce it to the students, have them practice the strategy a few times, and then move on to the next strategy, with the intent of going back recursively to reteach strategies as needed, or as the content lends itself to a particular strategy. So we start activity 1 here with the basics, sentences and fragments. This is where we really want to develop that foundational understanding for the students conceptually of what a sentence is, what sets it apart from a fragment, and how to repair fragments when they encounter them in their own writing. And for those of you that are following along in the book, this strategy begins on page 26. So as we saw with a lot of those pre-assessment examples, and as many of you commented yourselves in the chat, students often write conversationally using run-on sentences, fragments, or just incomplete thoughts, because again, that is how they speak. And so when in doubt, when students are unsure of how to use a particular written language structure, they're going to just fall back on writing the way they speak. And here are some further examples. So here, was just a selfish and stuck-up older man, or didn't care what other people thought him. Or a run-on here where this student writes, his actions made him evil. He killed innocent people and built an army of stormtroopers to do his dirty work. So clearly, these are students that really conceptually have not yet grasped what a complete sentence is, what are the components of a complete sentence, and they're unable to discern sentence boundaries properly. So students must be explicitly taught that writing requires a lot more precision than speaking does. So this is what we call the student-facing activity. In other words, if you were to give students a sentences and fragments worksheet or project the activity on the board, this is what it would look like. In this activity, students have to identify if the given words form a sentence or are a fragment. If the group of words do form a sentence, students must then rewrite that sentence on the writing lines below, supplying correct capitalization and punctuation. If the group of words are a fragment, students have to identify it's a fragment and then repair the fragment by adding whatever information is missing. So for number 1, for example, the students would read political maps and identify that political maps, well, it's a fragment. So they would put F for fragment. And it's a fragment because it doesn't tell us anything about political maps. So what about them? What do they do? Then students have to repair that fragment by saying something that they've learned about political maps. For example, political maps illustrate cities, capitals, and national borders. Similarly, for number 2, students would read, is the capital of Nebraska? And once again, identify, well, this is a fragment. And now think about what's missing. Well, what is the capital of Nebraska? And now thinking back to the content that they're learning, they have to supply that information. Omaha is the capital of Nebraska. And they're going to write out that newly repaired sentence on the writing line below. Now, for the last one, a legend explains the symbols on a map. Okay, well, we have a complete thought. We do have a sentence here, so students can label it as a sentence, but we also want to hold them accountable for proper punctuation and capitalization. So now they're going to rewrite that sentence on the writing line below, supplying those mechanics, the capitalization and punctuation. So notice, and one thing that we're going to stress with each activity is the importance of formatting. All of these activities are formatted in a very specific and thought out way. And with sentences and fragments, notice that we do not supply the capitalization or punctuation on the worksheet, even if the words do make up a complete sentence. We want students, with this activity to practice supplying correct punctuation and capitalization themselves. So as a way to automatize that skill. Another thing to notice here is the fragments that we supply for the students to repair. Notice that here we're supplying students with either a subject as the fragment or a predicate. We're not conflating the two, and we're not just providing students with a random string of words to repair. And so this brings us really to the purpose behind this activity and the reason why it's worthwhile to explicitly teach to your students. So why teach students this activity, sentences and fragments? Well, for one, this activity will help students to understand the concept of a complete sentence, and it's going to teach them how to discern sentence boundaries. For more proficient writers, this is also a strategy where it can help them to understand the meanings of subjects, predicates, and even prepositional phrases. Now, when it comes to actually introducing this language to the students, again, use your clinical judgment. For your level 2 students, it might be worthwhile to just introduce them to this terminology right when you begin the activity. But notice for elementary level students, you don't necessarily have to use language like subject and predicate to get them to understand the concepts behind what a subject and predicate is. And ultimately, that conceptual understanding is going to be more important than if the students can define the vocabulary terms. This is also a strategy, like we mentioned with formatting, where students are going to work to automatize and to internalize those rules for proper capitalization, punctuation, spelling, and vocabulary. And notice in this second example is the capital of Nebraska. We didn't capitalize even the N in Nebraska, even though it is a proper noun. So not just getting students to capitalize the first letter of the sentence, but we're also going to hold them accountable for capitalizing the proper nouns as well. And like with all of the strategies in the method, this serves as a really great comprehension check, because students are going to have to draw upon the content that they're learning in order to successfully repair these fragments. So for example, if after the lesson, students don't remember what the capital of Nebraska is, they're not going to be able to successfully complete the lesson. So here we see really the high leverage nature of all of these strategies. They're meant to teach students the writing strategies as well as reinforce the content that they're learning in your classroom. And so here's an example of how this lesson could fit, or how this activity rather could fit in your lesson. So let's say that you just had this mini lesson on geography, and these are the questions that originally you had intended to ask the students. You were going to ask them, what are political maps and what is the capital of Nebraska? And comprehension questions like this are pretty par for the course when it comes to assessing students' understanding in the classroom. But here, maybe instead of just asking these questions, you can provide students with a sentences and fragments activity. So notice here, by converting this to sentences and fragments, you are addressing the same instructional goals. Students are being held accountable for the same content, but you're doing so in an activity where you are also reinforcing the concept of what a complete sentence is. So again, these strategies are all meant to be formative assessment tools of high leverage. Now, students often struggle even just with the basics of what a complete sentence is. And so we know a sentence consists of a group of words that includes that subject, who or what the sentence is about, and a predicate, right, telling us something about the subject. And of course, these words also have to form a complete thought. So many students can learn conceptually what a complete sentence is by hearing the sentences alongside sentence fragments. So as Sophia mentioned earlier, these activities don't always have to just be in worksheet form. And in fact, when you first introduce students to the strategies, often there's a lot of benefit in starting with oral activities. So in this example, we can introduce students to sentences and fragments by just putting some fragments on the board and having students orally convert the fragments into sentences. So for example, we could start with subjects here. We could write these subjects on the board, the little birds, Joseph and Bella. And we can have a conversation with our students. Okay, students, the little birds, does that tell us everything we need to know? Right? What are we wondering here? Well, what about the little birds? Maybe what do the little birds do? Or what do the little birds look like? And you can elicit some responses from the students, right? How can we complete this thought? The little birds ate seeds, the little birds have blue feathers, and do the same thing for Joseph and Bella. So notice with this oral activity, you're helping students to see what's missing by calling attention to the missing information. And similarly with fragments that are predicates, right? Ate a great dinner. Well, again, students, what do we not know that we want to know here, right? Who ate a great dinner? The family? Was it just one person that ate a great dinner? We need more information. Let's make this fragment a complete sentence. So again, just like with the student-facing example, notice in this exercise that we are providing students with one of two things as a fragment. Either the subject, or what the sentence is about, or the predicate, which tells us something about the subject. And the reason that we are giving them subjects or predicates as fragments is because these are the essential components that make up a sentence. So it's what we want students to focus on. It's what we want them conceptually to understand needs to be in a sentence to make it complete. And we're going to have them practice repairing these fragments by recalling one piece or the other. Now, here's a level 2 example around of mice and men. And again, as Sophia mentioned, even for level 2 students, there's plenty of utility in oral instruction and practice of the activities. So let's say that the students were asked to read independently for 10 to 15 minutes in class. Instead of just then asking one or two, comprehension questions to check for understanding, we could give students an activity like this. Either on the board, just writing the fragments, Carlson and the others, and is fated to be alone, and then having a conversation orally about what information can be supplied to repair those fragments. Or this oral activity can be a prelude to a worksheet like we see on the right, where students are repairing these fragments and actually writing out the sentences using pencil and paper. And of course, like with all of the activities, you can use your clinical judgment to decide whether you need to begin with the oral activity or if your students are ready to jump right into the worksheet itself. And as you can see, looking at the worksheet, if students are going to successfully complete this, they're going to have to recall what they read in class. So in this way, you're also assessing what they gained from that independent reading. Did they understand what they read? Now, once students have had practice distinguishing between sentences and fragments, you can modify this assignment to just have students convert fragments into sentences, or to repair fragments into sentences rather. So here in this example, students are reading The Librarian of Basra, and now all of the words that they're given in the worksheet are fragments that they have to repair. And for struggling writers, one way that you can scaffold this activity is by labeling the fragment so that students know whether they're looking for a subject or a predicate to repair the fragment. Now, here are some examples of this activity in math and science. And, as Sophia stated with one of our principles, really anywhere that there is content that needs to be assessed, there's going to be a TWR strategy that can serve as the vehicle for that assessment. And this method can really be a game changer when students are practicing the strategies from class to class and writing this way and having this expectation for writing across all content areas. Now, with all of the activities, we're also going to share some technical tips. So as you are practicing creating these activities for your students, these are just some things to consider to ensure that the lessons run smoothly and to avoid any sort of student confusion along the way. So when you are starting this activity with students, they've only practiced, it's the first time practicing, or they've only practiced it once or twice, we would recommend, again, beginning with subjects, or predicates as the fragments that you are providing for students to repair. So for example, if you give them the younger family, you can say, what about the younger family, right? What's missing? What did they do? Or for predicates such as founded Providence, well, again, what's missing? Who, right? Who founded Providence? And once the students are ready, you can up the rigor by giving them prepositional phrases as fragments or dependent clauses as fragments to repair. Now, these are more challenging. And again, we would hold off on initially giving these as fragments because with these phrases, both the subject and the predicate are missing from the sentence. So it makes it a little harder for the students. Additionally, with dependent clauses, for example, it would also be helpful if students have some familiarity with subordinating conjunctions like although, if, and after before we give them dependent clauses to repair. A few more technical tips when creating fragments for your students. First, as many of you will likely be doing, creating these activities on a Word document, watch out for that Word autocorrect feature where Word really stubbornly tries to capitalize that first letter of the line, whether you want it to or not. I know from experience, sometimes I have to click it off a few times before it actually listens to me. So one reason why we want to make sure that we do provide that fragment with a lowercase letter, in addition to automatizing that skill for students, right, capitalizing the first word of a sentence or proper nouns, if we gave students a fragment like this, waters the crops, and that W is capitalized, it's going to encourage students to try to begin that fragment as the beginning of the sentence. And maybe that's not the intention of the fragment and can lead to some syntactically awkward sentences for the students. So again, that first tip, make sure that we are not capitalizing any of the letters, but in particular, that first letter of the word in the fragment. Next tip, avoid using commands as fragments. Commands, are sentences where the subject is implied. And so it can be easy to remove the subject and accidentally provide students with a command, such as search for food and shelter. And so if that's the case, we can easily just conjugate that first word in the command, the verb, and turn it into a fragment. So now searched for food and shelter. Well, now we're looking for the who, right? Who or what searched for food and shelter. And finally, we want to avoid giving students a subject and a partial predicate, such as Nelson Mandela was. So really, this is our entry point strategy. We're really trying to lay that foundational understanding for students of what a sentence is and the concept of subjects and predicates. And we don't want to conflate the two parts of a sentence by providing fragments where there's a combination of the two. So here, Nelson Mandela is the subject, but we've also given that helping verb was, which is a part of what the predicate will be. And so we really just, again, want to crystallize for the students one or the other and have them practice repairing both and really internalizing what each component of that sentence looks like. So here, for example, we can just give them Nelson Mandela, and now they can provide that predicate for themselves. One last teacher tip. When creating these fragments, be wary of lifting fragments verbatim from the text that the students are writing about. So let's say, for example, here students had read an article around a debate, should bottled water be banned, and some pros and cons to the question. Now, you might want to hone in on this fact here, the amount of water bottles that Americans consumed in 2019. Right? And it's a startling statistic, definitely engaging, and content that's worth having the students recall. But notice here, the sentence in the article says Americans consumed 14.4 billion gallons of bottled water in 2019. And here the teacher gave the fragment verbatim from the article, consumed 14.4 billion gallons of bottled water in 2019. Now, if we give students a fragment that has the exact wording of that sentence, then really all we're encouraging the student to do is just to go back into that article, skim, find the fragment in the sentence, and then just copy and paste whatever part of the sentence is missing. So this really doesn't require the students to do any sort of thinking about the content themselves. And
How's it going?
it also
It's
encourages
going.
plagiarism in a
So-
way. So instead,
attached a
we
note
want to
to it?
make the
Okay.
fragments about the
Fantastic.
text,
This
but not lift exactly from
it's got it right
the
on the cover.
text.
Mhm.
So for example,
back into the
here,
pipeline
the
again.
teacher looking at this last paragraph in the article
Does
paraphrased
that
one of
seem
the
like it? I
important
mean,
points
it is
from
what
that
it is.
paragraph
Yes.
as a
I'm not gonna make a
fragment,
thing about it,
restricted the use of single serve water
Okay.
bottles.
If they're saying
Now,
something,
students are not going to be able to
Goodness,
just
no.
find this
No.
language
Okay.
verbatim in the
if it's yes,
paragraph,
then it's yes.
and they're actually
All right,
forced
very
to
good.
consider the
Alright.
content
He's on the same
in
conference
order
I'm
to
in, so I'll give
repair
it to
the
him
fragment.
when this is
As the
over.
teacher, this
Oh.
also gives you a
He-
better
who-
understanding.
Jerry,
of
he's on the
whether
same
actually
thing. He's got to sign it first, and he sends it to
Whereas if they were
business.
able to
You want me to
successfully
send
repair
it,
this
bring it
first
down to his
example,
office?
Jerry?
did they repair it
Okay,
successfully
yeah.
because
Is his
they
door?
recalled the
Okay.
missing subject or because they found it directly in the text? It's difficult to know.
He's straight across the hallway.
which.
Ah, there we go.
So we recommend thus not lifting fragments verbatim from the text. Now, when creating any TWR activity, something that we repeat often throughout the course, Sophia and I will sound a bit like broken records by the end, but is just really emphasizing the importance of creating an anticipated response. And this is going to be the anticipated student response of what you want the students to actually be able to answer in the worksheet. It's something like a teacher copy or a cheat sheet of sorts. And there's a lot of reasons why it's really important to create this anticipated response for any given activity. For one, by doing this, you're really ensuring that the activity yields the intended outcome. Right? When you anticipate what the students are going to say, you can really direct them towards what the content is that you want them to recall, elicit, or practice writing down. And if students are struggling to get to that content, having that anticipated response also really sets you up as the teacher to more precisely scaffold and to reword questions to get the students to that content. And lastly, when we are anticipating the student responses, we do want to, of course, have high expectations for what the students are going to say, but we also want to keep them realistic. So, the types of responses that we as teachers would be able to produce are not going to be on the same level as what the students will be able to produce. So we want to just watch out from creating anticipated responses that are maybe extremely complex and would be very challenging for students to get to. So we want high yet realistic expectations in our anticipated responses. For this activity specifically, one way that we can create it is by working backwards from an anticipated response. So for example, let's say that in social studies, students are learning about the Paleolithic era and early humans. And the content that we really want the students to write down by the end of this lesson is early modern humans drew lifelike images on cave walls. So that can be the anticipated response, what we eventually want the students to repair the fragment to be. From here, we can now just work backwards and pull out some candidate fragments. So for example, we could provide students with the fragment early modern humans. We could give them the fragment drew lifelike images on cave walls, or even a shortened predicate, drew lifelike images. Or if the students are capable, we could give them a prepositional phrase like on cave walls and work from there. So now in the chat, we're going to ask you to participate now. So again, let's say that we've developed this anticipated response. We want students to write the sentence or something closely resembling a team of archaeologists discovered 73,000-year-old art in South Africa. So in the chat, what are some fragments that we could pull from this anticipated response? A lot of you are pulling out that subject. Excellent. A team of archaeologists. I see some examples of predicates. So discovered 73,000-year-old art. For our more proficient students, some of you are supplying in South Africa, that prepositional phrase. Yep, excellent. Just remember too, that we're not going to include any capitalization, even if it is going to be intended as the beginning of the sentence. And a lot of you are doing that. I see a lot of intentionally lowercase South Africa's coming in to the chat. Now I do a few just pointers here. So some responses I'm seeing, such as like 73,000-year-old art, for example. So only including, a part of the predicate that doesn't include the verb. If we supply students with a fragment like that, then very likely they're going to see 73,000-year-old art as the subject, not as part of the predicate. And the sentence that they write is going to vary quite a bit from our anticipated response. So if our intent is for that information to be part of the predicate, we want to also include that verb. So we would say discovered 73,000-year-old art, and not leave off that word discovered. Same with, so for example, we wouldn't want to give archaeologists discovered, right? So we want to have just the subject or the predicate. We're not going to provide a partial predicate along with the subject. And I like how a lot of you, when you're providing that subject, are providing the whole phrase there, a team of archaeologists, right? So this is one way that we can really encourage students to and reinforce the benefits of precise language. So, archaeologists we could provide as a subject, but we could be even more precise than that and say a team of archaeologists. And so to really reinforce that concept for the students, we're including that full subject, that full phrase of the subject in the activity. Great, yes. And so collectively, we have identified all of our fragments as well here. Okay, so before we move on to the next activity, we're going to give all of you an opportunity to create for your content. And thank you, Sophia. So Sophia has dropped a link in the chat that will bring you to what is the CodePen template. And essentially, this is meant to just give you practice making the actual worksheet that the students would use. So the CodePen template that the link will take you to is formatted just like the activity is formatted on our website. And so what we'd like you all to take a few minutes to do, we'll say 5 or 6 minutes, is to think of a fragment that is embedded in the content that you're teaching the students or plan on teaching the students, and then come up with that anticipated response as well, how you could repair it. Link is not working.
All right, it's working, Sean. I just checked it. So it's all set now. Okay. So I reposted it. Just, you can click the latest one I posted.
Okay, thank you, Sophia.
Sean.
And as you're working on this, we're going to leave this screen up. You'll just see this box of tips as you're making it on the left here. Just some things to watch out for, some technical tips as you're creating those fragments. It's 12 o'clock Eastern time now, so let's say about 5 minutes. And then Sophia, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a few highlights that capture your attention.
I will.
Before we move on.
Sorry, no problem. I got you. I'm not sure what could be wrong though. It's working on, I just tried again, Miss Pillar, and it's working for me. Maybe it could be an issue with your computer.
if the link is not working and you're comfortable doing so, feel free to share your activity in the chat. And yep, Sophia's dropping that link again for anyone that might have missed it.
All right, Tracy, you're not clear. So the link, you're going to click the link and you're going to open CodePen, which is similar to what the template would look like for this activity, for the student facing activity. So you're just practicing creating that activity in the content. So, and you're going to include that anticipated response. So once you open the link, you're just going to type in a fragment 1, and then what would be the anticipated response at the bottom, and you can do another example. Fragment 2, and then the corrected sentence. And there's a good one here, Santa Anna. What about corrected Santa Anna was the general of the Mexican army. So I could tell that's in history. Right, Sean, we have so many coming in. So far, so good. So far, so good until I see this one. So remember, you're not going to punctuate the fragment. So you will not punctuate the fragment. The students will put the end punctuation when they write the corrected sentence. So I'm seeing a few where the end punctuation is in the fragment. I live in the ocean, sharks live in the ocean. Antony and Cleopatra were defeated by the Romans, built pyramids. The ancient Egyptians built pyramids in the desert. So these are all good. So far, so good, Sean.
Hopefully everyone, or most of you have had enough time to submit a form. Sophia, I know you've shared a few. Is there one or two more you want to just highlight, and then we'll move on to some common feedback?
I'm seeing one here. It says it's not, so the fragment is the white hair from his pocket, and then the corrected sentence is drifted away in the water as he knew what he had told the truth. So we have to be very mindful here. The fragment, it's like what is missing. So that it has to match. The corrected sentence would be in it, the correction or the sentence, it has to be based on the fragment that's given. So I'm not seeing how the corrected sentence, it's based on what's given. So just be mindful of that, Sean. Yeah, this example, it's the same thing. He'd be approached, he braced himself for what was sure to be certain death. So I'm not sure what the issue is there, but it would not be, that would not be an effective activity for the students. But this is a good one. Head of the executive branch. The president is the head of the president of the United States is the head of the executive branch. Establish the legislative branch. Article 1 of the United States Constitution established the legislative branch. So there's some great ones there, Sean. The good thing is though, there's no command, not seeing any, the capitalization, at least that's not there, but the end punctuation is there, and no partial predicate. So at least the tips there, we could see where you remembered those, but just be careful. The fragment, it really should, the corrected, the anticipated response should match what you gave the students as fragments. So
Thank
that's
you,
my
Sophia.
observation, Sean. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and so we intentionally don't show the examples as we discuss them. Just we don't want to call anyone out, for example, if there's an error here or there. So that's why we only try to point out just one or two. And thank you for that suggestion, Debbie. So was asking about if you could receive a copy of this CodePen template you make, and that's definitely a conversation we can have with our tech team about if that's manageable or not. So thank you. We'll address that. Now, these are not responses from this particular group, but as we have participants share their responses, we do just kind of randomly collect a few just as a way to highlight activities that looked really good, and then some where there was still some sort of error made, and just again kind of a final watch out for those errors. So here, for example, a participant from a previous course had put the indigenous people include as their fragment. So again, the error here is just including that partial predicate. So when we give students the fragments, we really just want to keep them as the fragment or solely the predicate, and not some combination of the two where students might confuse or conflate them. Here, the Hubble telescope. So it is a subject, it's a good fragment. However, the participant had capitalized the letters. And so again, just making sure that we're holding the students accountable for supplying that correct capitalization and punctuation. And then finally here, read or read 10 books. So here, although it was meant as read 10 books, this sentence can also read as read 10 books. And so we want to watch out for what could be conceived as commands as a fragment. And so just changing the language, if for example you're using a homonym that might be read as read 10 books, to watch out for that as well. And then here, just a few examples of an activity that looked really strong for us. Okay, thank you, Debbie. Yes, I'm going to share this response with our tech team.
All right, so can I grab this one, Sean?
Yes, Sophia, I was just actually going to pause to just see if there were any questions
before
we go on. So any questions about this first activity or anything that's been mentioned thus far? Feel free to share in the chat or come off mute.
Chevy, you can go ahead and share your question.
Okay. Hi. I do fragments and sentences with my 9th graders, then like towards the middle of the year, because they really need more of a review of parts of speech before they can really grasp the concept of fragments and sentences. So I know that separate grammar instruction is discouraged by the Hochman method, but is there any framework within the Hochman method for going over parts of speech before you get to fragments and sentences so that they can kind of put all of that together?
We do show a lot of examples of as you're as you're delivering these strategies, just kind of organically embedding grammar instruction into the activities. Parts of speech is included in that. We do have a separate K through 2 course that puts a much stronger emphasis on kind of the oral practice component of some of these strategies. And actually for those youngest students, the sequence of activities is slightly different. Partly for the reason you alluded to. And so, if you have separate parts of speech activities that you're doing prior to sentences and fragments, we always say, this is kind of being presented through this introductory lens. Ultimately, your students best. And, if you feel that they need additional support in some other area before you show them this activity, then, we're certainly not going to say, don't do it. But we're just providing our kind of reasoning and justification for how we roll out the method to the students.
Good answer, Sean. Yes, I like that. Just additional information, you can provide it as you see necessary, depending on the gaps of the student. So there were instances when I had to address a little bit of parts of speech and so on. But the aim here is to do it organically as you're modeling the activity whole class. So good response there.
Okay, and Liz has let me see. I often use the term subject and predicate because the word or idea of a predicate could be confusing. When you start to teach sentences and fragments, you can tell. Yeah, so and that's again up to your judgment. So if you notice, like when we went through the oral exercises, the little birds, right? Like, what about the little birds? What do they look like? What are they doing? You're drawing students' attention to the fact that a predicate is missing without necessarily having to use the word predicate to get them there. So, most importantly, conceptually, is that they're able to identify that is the information that's missing. They need to say something about the birds. If you also want to have them know, like, look, this is what we call this a predicate, again, that's really up to you. And if you feel your students are able to internalize that as well, right? We were thinking about that cognitive load and how much additional cognitive load would we place on students if we're having them complete the activity as well as making them think about the terminology like predicate or subject they haven't heard before. And it really depends on the student.
So Debbie, I responded to your question about compound sentences. When we get to combining sentence, that's a strategy that you can use to teach your students that.
Okay, and we will, at the end of every session, we will pause for additional questions if anything comes up.
All right. Shawnee, since you taught dyslexic kids, you want to respond to a question? There's a question here about.
Sure. Is this from Gina?
Yeah.
Is there evidence-based features supporting scrambled? Okay, so yeah, so Gina, we were actually going to mention this when we get to this activity. Scrambled sentences, it pairs nicely with sentences and fragments, and I'll let Sophia talk about all the reasons why. However, specifically for students with dyslexia, it's often difficult for them, even in a scrambled sentence, to hear the incorrect grammar. And so for students with language-based learning disabilities like dyslexia, scrambled sentences is an activity that you can skip over and just focus on sentences and fragments since they accomplish similar goals. And I believe actually in the Writing Revolution book, Dr. Hockman makes that point as well.
All right, Sean, just let me know when I can progress.
Yes, go ahead, Sophia. So we'll try to make sure we get through this activity in the next 14 minutes before we end the session. And then again, we'll stick around if there are additional questions that come up.
And we have to support some participants. Those having issues with attendance, we'll collect their information so we can fix it at the office level. All right, guys, so continuing with the basics of a sentence, we are going to now move into scrambled sentences. Now, this is what the activity could look like. So as you see here, So students are asked to just rearrange the jumbled sequences of words into its correctly punctuated and capitalized sentences. So you might see in this ELA example, the students, they were given the blue sections here, that's the scrambled sentences to unscramble, and the first one is a definition. So this is actually showing that all the strategies, the sentence level strategies, can be used to push vocabulary acquisition. So here we could see where they unscramble that blue section to produce. A calamity is an event that causes sudden damage. And then for the second example, you could see where the blue section there, they're writing about unscramble, about how Buck felt an impending sense of doom. So as you can see, students, they're honing their grasp of writing those effective, complete sentences while you're simultaneously teaching them the content and vocabulary they need to cover. So this is going to take us to the why. Why teach scrambled sentences? Now, for one, it's going to help students to discern those sentence boundaries, right? Where do I start? What's in the middle? What's in the end? And as you can see, we only provide capitalization for the proper nouns. So someone questioned that. Can we share that with the students? Yes. For this activity, you are going to let them know the only thing they'll capitalize, that will be capitalized, would be the proper nouns. And we did not provide any punctuation. When the students, they unscramble the sentences, they are required to capitalize the first word and add that end punctuation. So remember, capitalize, they have to capitalize the first word and add the end punctuation. However, you capitalize those proper nouns for them. And two, it's going to help students learn correct word order in a sentence. And thirdly, it's also going to be a great way to assess or review vocabulary, because when they know the words, it's going to give them the context that they need to unscramble the sentence. However, point to note, you would not introduce new content or vocabulary with this activity. It has to be your own content that they have covered. And as a quick activity, instead of asking, so let's say you're done with you've read a section of the text there. Now, quick activity, instead of asking what is a calamity, right? Now you can just simply give students a scrambled sentence and have them produce that. And you're going to see if they can discern sentence boundaries. You're seeing if they can determine the correct order of the words. And you're also checking to see if they understand the content that you are covering. Yes. So this is a simple strategy, but also can be very, very powerful with teaching students how to write those solid sentences. And then when you're creating the activity for this particular activity for the students, we want for those level 1 learners to keep it short, 3 to 6 words.
Right. No problem's a good thing. Yes. I was afraid it was a problem. So if it's not a problem, then
so you could just, as soon as you're done with a topic here, you could just provide a scrambled sentence, as you see here, for students to unscramble, and it's a good way to go over that content. Okay. And in this level 2,
at this point,
you can see the content is more sophisticated. But the sentences aren't too long. So for your level 2 learners, when you're reading these 7 to 9 words, that's the perfect place to keep it. And now, if students, you might have students who need additional support with this activity, and you might want to differentiate it to meet them where they are. So one way you could differentiate this activity would be, so instead of capitalizing the first word, you can just bold or circle the first word of the sentence and let them know this is a clue as to the word you're going to use to start the sentence. So you see here where land around the Mississippi River belonged to France, and the Louisiana Purchase cost $15 million. Now, if you take a look at the second example, you will notice that the word purchase is capitalized here. And if this was not done, then it could lead to confusion. The students could be confused as this is a verb and not a part of Louisiana Purchase. So it's very important for you to point out the proper nouns will be capitalized, but not the first letter of the sentence. Now, a few technical tips to share with you when you're creating these activities. Sweet spots for the numbers of words. As I mentioned earlier, level 1, keep it 3 to 6. And then for level 2, then you keep it between 7 to 9 words. So remember, the content, such as the vocabulary that you will use, is what will drive that rigor and not so much the number of words. And then you want to also avoid using too many function words. So think of those articles and prepositions, right? And, the, in, of, etc. If you have too many of these, it's going to make multiple configurations of the sentence possible. And ideally, the sentence can only be, when put together in one order, it's not meant to be a guessing game for the students. So just be mindful of those articles and preposition. And then you want to make sure, very, very important here, that the number of words that you're going to provide in that student-facing activity, it must match the number of words in the anticipated response. Now, obviously, mistakes happen. I've been there. Sean, I'm sure you've been there too. And students, they love to point out our mistakes, but this can lead to confusion. Students being very, very confused. So please make sure you double check to ascertain the number of words in the anticipated response. It's matching what you're giving the students. And finally, we want you to avoid using too many scrambles, right? A quick do now, exit ticket, no more than 4 scrambles, depending on where your students are. It should not take up an entire lesson. So just be mindful of that. Now we are going to have you try it. So this is in our content. So here you have word learn help sentence order correct students activities and scrambled. So we're going to have you unscramble that in the chat. And you could also put a strategy that you use when you're doing it to unscramble. How did you go about doing that? So we'll give you 30 seconds to a minute. Oh, some of you are very quick. Wait. So scrambled sentence activities help students learn correct word order. Yes, that was the anticipated response. You're all correct. So what strategy use? I see. Let me see what strategies. So subjects, so some of you find in subject and verbs. So just considering that prior knowledge, especially after these 2 activities with the students, that could be one way that they would approach unscrambling. So I see grouping words together. Knowledge, thank you, Debbie. So that knowledge, you want the students to always rely on that too to support them in doing the activity. So Elizabeth Chung taught the order. All right, thank you so much for sharing your method for doing this. Let's look at a few of these in action. So, and these are from our partner schools, and we love to just shout out the amazing work that they're doing there. So Sean, if you want, you can click to see the examples here. So Miss Loveladies, the first picture you're looking at here is Miss Loveladies' 3rd grade classroom, and the students, they were encouraged come up to the board and write out their sentences. And what's happening here is an example of that hear, see, say. So the students, they were encouraged to read the sentence aloud for our reinforcement. And then we're going to look at Miss Rose's, right? And this is our 5th grade social studies classroom. And again, the students, they were encouraged. So you can look closely at crossing out the words as they went along and scrambling, or number the word order as they worked to unscramble that word. And you could also see the students circle that first word there, and they were encouraged to add a check above the words that they used instead of crossing them out, just in case they change their minds. And then my personal favorite here, Ms. Ramos, and you could see she printed out the words and cut them out on those sentence strips. Students work collaboratively to unscramble them, and this is just a fantastic way of making these activities more interactive and multisensory. So all wonderful strategies that you can share with your students here when you're doing this particular activity with them. And Sean, we can pause and start with the next strategy when we return. So for those of you who did not get an opportunity to record your attendance, we're going to have you do so now, and you can share the link too, Sean. And then for those of you who are still struggling, we're going to ask for your name and email if you cannot record your attendance, so we can forward that to the office for them to figure out what's going on. And Sean reposted all the necessary links to Google Classroom, the attendance, Google Classroom, also the code for that, and the free resources library. We encourage you to sign up, and you will find so much supportive material there too.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Sure.
How long will the Google Classroom be available to us to access whatever we need?
Yeah, great question. The Google Classroom is going to be around forever, essentially. It doesn't go away. You can come back to
Awesome.
access it at any time. The only component or aspect of the classroom that is time sensitive are the course recordings. Once the recordings are uploaded, they're going to remain in the Google Classroom for about 2 weeks, and then they will come down. But everything else will stay up indefinitely.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for those of you sharing a takeaway. I know we're meeting again in a few hours, but we always end each session asking for a takeaway. And if you do need to, if you are having issues recording attendance and need to provide your email, just message Sophia or I directly so the message doesn't get lost in all of the other chat that's coming in.
Hi, I sent a couple of chat messages about how do you know if your attendance has been recorded, because we don't get a response back saying it was recorded. Like we don't get an email back.
Once you submit, it should be recorded. It goes to our tech team. If you're concerned about it, or if you feel that it didn't submit properly, again, you can give us your information. We can confirm it's been recorded, but it should be recorded once you submit.
Yes.
And I did see, well, the comment has disappeared in the chat, but I did see a comment about having recorded attendance for a future session. With the beginning of each session, we'll ask that you take attendance separately for each session. So you will end up taking attendance 6 separate times. So we just ask that you hold off on proactively taking attendance for future sessions and just wait for this session to begin. Now, if you are watching a recording, if you're unable to attend a course live, you can still record your attendance for that. You would just put on the form that you saw the recording versus attended live.
So remember, anyone who's still having issues recording your attendance, just send me your name as well as your email so I can have them check to see if you're in the right course or just figure out what the issue could be. And Karen, you can go ahead and ask.
I have a question about the sentence scramble before it gets moved on from. Would it be acceptable, looking at that example with the calamity, would it be acceptable if a student said an event that causes sudden damage is called a calamity? Does the word order
Are you
matter
asking if they should? Are you asking if they should stay with the add words to it, or
No, I'm asking if they put, so on the what is a calamity, the sentence that you have is a calamity is an event, and it goes on. Would it be just as acceptable for them to start with the definition, an event that causes the sudden damage is a calamity? Does that word order matter?
What do you think? I think it doesn't matter once it is correct. It's not like it's wrong.
Right. They didn't add words or anything, so it's just a matter of.
Right, as long as they don't add words. And we do say avoid too many function words to avoid multiple configurations, but in this case it's really two, and they mean the same thing.
Okay.
The intention really, this activity shouldn't really be longer than a few minutes.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
students are really building on that subject predicate foundation. They might look for the subject first and then, you know, the predicate. It's just helping them to find that natural end of the sentence within the parameters of a teacher created sentence. It's just not meant to be one where they're kind of scratching their head and thinking of 10 different ways to put it together. That's not the purpose of it.
Great. Perfect. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Claire. We're always working on pacing because we know it can be overwhelming, you know, considering our first time in the course. So thank you. We're happy we're doing a good job with that. So that's good to hear. And yes, you will leave and there's a different link for session 2. So you would need to just leave your computer open for those of you who are wondering.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Jacqueline. Is that Jacqueline? Yes, go ahead.
That's not me, but she can go first.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, Jacqueline, you go ahead. You had your hand up.
Okay, thank you. So I was just wondering, because I teach 3rd grade, and I know that some people do the scrambled sentences with the sentence strips cut up into pieces, and then the ones that you showed were on a worksheet. And I was just wondering if there's anything, you know, about age ranges of like which is better. You know, I'm sure for younger kids, the tactile process of that might be better for them. Like, obviously, though, it's easier to set up the worksheets sometimes. So I was just wondering for 3rd grade, if you think that's an appropriate age to start to transfer them to doing it on the worksheet instead of, you know, sentence strips cut up.
I would say for that, just make sure that you're using your clinical judgment to determine if what they are. So we're teaching you these strategies, but again, we don't know the students in front of you more than you do. So if you feel as though they're ready for that, then we go right ahead and do so.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I like the comment from Kayla. You know, the activities are they're designed to be adaptable and be able to be scaffolded to meet your students where they are. You know, I saw a comment about a resource room teacher using sentence scrambles with her dyslexic students and just scaffolding to get them there. So, you know, if that does work and if they're able to, if you're bolding the first word or circling it and that works, you know, great. If there's students that it's not working or it's adding to the confusion, then again, you know, you can stick to sentences and fragments. There's a lot of maneuverability within the method to kind of use your judgment. Okay, thank you, Gina. I will send your name along for attendance.
Yeah. Here. Yes. You all go and break and you're back.
Okay, and I know we have a bunch of people still, and we're past the hour. If you'd like to go, please feel free to. We'll see everyone in a couple hours. You know, get a screen break hopefully. If you are staying back, if you have a question or a comment, please, you know, continue to do so. We'll try to get to everyone.